Hey guys, Coach Tom here. Today we're going to go over a presentation on how to train for soccer outside of your skill development sessions. All right? This is something that we deal with all the time with our athletes. We have a lot more soccer players than we do any other sport. And it's just something that I think for the upcoming years, months, anything we're going to have to really kind of figure out, because either skill sessions might be down because we won't be able to practice as much, or we're going to ramp up really quickly and we got to figure out how to maintain some kind of level of fitness as we jump back in the sport. So today we're going to go over just kind of like how we train and what we see as the best practice right now for training for soccer outside of your skill development stuff. And that's a big part of this, right? Is like, what takes priority? Right? To get better at soccer, you have to play soccer. So you're not going to get better at soccer in the weight room necessarily. It's going to help develop a lot more qualities around what you need to be able to play. But ultimately, how we get better is through playing more soccer. We wouldn't magically flip the script and go to lifting 3 times a week and then maybe sometimes playing doing 3 or 4 training sessions on the weekend as if we were playing a soccer tournament to get better. We still want to manage this idea that our ultimate goal is to be performing on the field, which means our training should supplement that in a way that allows us to perform. All right? When is soccer not the priority? Well, if I have someone that's really injured, playing more that kind of may have potentially caused that isn't the best idea, right? So now all of a sudden where we really can invest in staying fit and being able to bring ourselves back as quick as possible is that's where we would actually be in the weight room maybe 3 times a week, and maybe just working on a little bit of skills that's tolerable 1 or 2 times a week, and that's when they would flip-flop. If I have a real strength deficit, right, or something that really stands out, is like, man, I can't even play a 90-minute game without having to take like 3 substitutions in each half. That's where maybe we invest a little bit more in some conditioning or some strength training as we kind of continue to play and manage those a little bit differently. All right. Ultimately, our off-season, preseason, and in-season, we're all trying to accomplish the same thing, right? We're trying to get better at soccer. And what we want to do, though, is just manage the volumes and intensity when they are kind of needed most. So for in-season, yeah, I'm not going to be training 4 days a week. Right? I might have 1 or 2 lifts that are maybe sometimes dialed back a little bit just so I can kind of maintain or even improve a little bit on what I was working during the off season, and also develop some qualities so I don't lose them while I'm kind of busting my butt during the season. All right, so the one-time fitness does not matter. Right? And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about is if fitness was a determining factor in sports, man, we would see people like our cross-country runners and our marathoners and sometimes even like CrossFit athletes that really are focusing on work capacity would be the best athletes. But that's not the case, right? What really determines actually what makes you a good athlete in your field sport is your ability to understand the sport and anticipate. So I could have the fastest guy in the field, but if I have someone that understands where the ball is going to be before it gets there, they will always beat the person that's reactionary, okay? And that makes it think of like we think of some of our best athletes in the game. They're not the biggest, they're not the strongest, but man, can they get to a spot before the ball's even there, which makes them look really fast. Or they've already made the decision before it comes in. So the ball comes in and they've already know where it's going. It's a one-touch pass as opposed to have to stop it, turn, and then play. Right? That's what real speed looks like in our field sports as opposed to sometimes our physical qualities. So if you've ever played that team that has just one really fast forward and they just launch the ball up the field and let that person run onto it. If you have a smart defender, he's just going to kind of gravitate and adjust, and he's always going to be in a better position. Okay? So realistically, we want to be understanding that fitness isn't always the way to being the best soccer player. It's a huge part of it, and actually when we look at what we usually see as a deficit that kind of limits us, it's actually sometimes because that's the case, people discount the idea of training, right? Of like strength training and stuff like that. So we'll dive into that a little bit more as we get going, all right? All right, so where do we start? We want to start with an assessment, right? We got to know where our baseline is and also what markers we're going to use as a way to determine are we moving in the right direction. And we have to understand what are our actual demands of this sport. We need a robust aerobic system, right? And that is a kind of general term, but we need to have the ability to actually sustain energy output for long periods of time. okay? It doesn't mean that we need to be running 7 miles a day just because that's the ground we typically cover in a professional game. But what it does mean is you should probably be able to run like a mile at a certain time, and you should probably be able to run at least maybe 20 minutes at a certain capacity once in a while, and that'll develop some of the qualities we have to have as a foundation so that when we do some really high intense work, our cardiovascular system can actually recover from it, okay? We need to have maximal speed and acceleration, right? I mean, this game is constantly just changing direction, anticipating and taking off and trying to get up to as fast as possible to outrun our opponent. All right? And then our movement quality really needs to be on point. I mean, one of the biggest things we see with injuries is that an athlete will come in and be like, you know what, my knee's really bugging me, and turns out they can't flex at the spine, they can only extend, and they have no idea how to find their heels because everything is just going forward, right? And that's really one of the big pieces of making sure that, man, if I want to improve performance, I want to get faster, I have to remove maybe some of the limitations, and sometimes that could be movement quality issues, right? Strength and power might be secondary to those ones up top. The only thing, though, is because, like we talked about earlier, they may not get addressed as often as they should because the game is so heavily kind of geared towards some of the other factors, right? And people can get away with it. We see athletes all the time get away with just being really aerobically fit in earlier years, or maybe they're aerobically fit and they have good skills, but if they were to go play like in college after being in high school and they're still undersized, man, they're probably going to get tossed around, right? And that's where all of a sudden, man, they have to probably invest in some kind of strength and power program to keep up, especially as we move up levels. All right, so how do we measure? All right, this could be anything, right? Anybody can use any measuring tool they want. This is the stuff we typically use. So like a 300-yard shuttle, a beep test, a timed 40 or a Woodway sprint. We like to probably use a mile time as well, all to give us an idea about that aerobic system and the conditioning of our athletes, right? Next, we would use our movement quality screen. We use sometimes a top-tier SFMA. We use sometimes the FMS or the 3D maps from Gary Gray. We have some other table tests from Orthopedic Evals. Anything that's going to give us an idea as to how that person's moving in space and how their joints react to certain demands is going to be super helpful. Right? Again, it can be whatever you want. And then strength and power. We like vertical jump. We like some of our med ball throws. Bench press you could use. We use our 8-rep split squat, a one-arm cable row. You could use a squat. You could use a deadlift. Anything along those lines that will give you information to make the adjustment to say, hey, does this person meet our standard or not? Right? And if they do, awesome, we can probably develop maybe some of the lower-hanging fruit of the things that they need to work on, or we can go after more of their strengths, right? If we have someone that's below our standard, we probably need to address that stuff first if that's what we think makes a robust soccer player. All right, once we have this data, now what, right? And what we just talked about, do we address the deficits, or do we help maintain their strengths? Okay, it can be either one. You got to figure out what is the biggest limiting factor for that person and then make the adjustment. In team sports, this can be kind of challenging, right? Because maybe people are all over the map in terms of what they need help on. That's where maybe dwindling it down to like, all right, what are our 2 biggest factors that if we nail this, the whole team will be better off by doing so? Or is it more, I do have the ability to do it on an individual approach, okay? If we are getting most of our conditionings from practicing games, like, is that something we need to do more outside of practice? Like, does that need something we need to focus on? Probably not, and that's where we see the biggest kind of downfall in a lot of training nowadays is we're training the same systems over and over again, right? And they either get beat up or, in reality, they're really not getting taxed enough to create a higher adaptation, all right? And we'll get more into that as we check some slides. And that's where, really, if you just had one day outside of your normal schedule devoted towards strength training and power, you can see a huge benefit, right? Because it'll supplement those other practices and games where we're really training more of the aerobic system and our cardiovascular stuff. So one of the things the 2 things that will not get addressed during practice and games, right? Strength, right? We were just kind of talking about that. We don't have any external load. It's not like in football where you're smashing into each other and trying to run it and like people are trying to drag you down. We do have some contact, but more often than not, we are just running. So we have like pretty much maximal speed. We don't have maximal speed, but we have some high accelerations and we have change of direction. So we have a lot of forces kind of getting directed into the ground at different angles, but we're not really ever actually putting on an external load, okay? So a good example is, man, some soccer players have some huge legs, right? They probably never lifted a weight in their life. That's because they're imposing a lot of demand on that stuff. But their upper body doesn't look like they've ever touched anything in the planet, right? And that's that's kind of a good example. We can still get some kind of effect, but we're missing it in some capacity because the sport never requires it. So maximal strength, or strength in general, is something that we definitely need to address. And we don't need to be power lifters. What's always cringing to me is watching a soccer team that is all of a sudden just doing heavy back squats, deadlifting, and bench pressing. Right? Like that's like probably the worst combination in the long run for a soccer player to be utilizing for something that requires so much rotation and change of direction and acceleration. Right? They're not power lifters. So we want something that's probably going to be more between 50 to 90% of our load, maximal loads, than anything higher than that, right? And then maximal speed. We rarely see players get into a full out maximal speed during the game, even in practice sometimes. Unless you're an outside back or an outside mid making a run all the way down the line, you're probably not going to reach it, right? So we never reach that full tilt capacity, which, as will find out, is really where we're going to see a lot of our gains come from in the long run, okay? So what do we do with this assessment? All right, this is one of the assessments that we did over the past summer. All right, you can see we have our movement categories at the top. We have our 300-yard shuttle test. We have a vertical jump. We have a plank test, a wide balance test, a split squat test, split stance one-arm cable row, split stance one-arm cable press, a supine med ball throw, seated chest pass with the med ball, and then a farmer's carry. All right? We have a ton of information here. We have our standards, and if you look, what I circled was what really sticks out. So we have a dysfunctional toe touch and pain and extension. All right, so right off the bat, we have some movement issues that we probably need to be cautious of, or at least aware of, and maybe address. All right, our 300-yard shuttle, 64 seconds and 65 seconds. All right, we want all of our kids under 60 on both of them. So we know right there, all right, we have a conditioning problem, all right, or a limitation. All right, split squat, 10 pounds on each leg, severely under strength, right? Huge deficit. That's probably the biggest red flag. Split stance one-arm cable row, 20 pounds on each arm and 15 pounds on each one-arm cable press. So right off the bat, we have a conditioning limitation, maybe some movement quality that could hinder us, and a severe strength deficit. So our program is going to be geared more towards the strength side of anything, right? Do I really need to be addressing power for her? No, she actually jumped 16 inches. That's actually really good, right? So power is not an issue. What we are more concerned about is that she can't control that power. Right? And that might be why her movement she's getting some pain in movement. And maybe because she's not fit enough, her tissues fatigue too quickly, and that's another reason why. So we have a pretty clear-cut way as to what we want to address, all right? In that we need to build up some strength, and we need to address some of this conditioning stuff. All right? And you can see on the second round, right, she actually had a functional toe touch. She still had a little pain and extension. All right? So we improved some stuff, but she still felt pretty good. Her shuttle one went from 59 to 61, or 64 to 65, and then down to 59 and 61. So we did a great job addressing her conditioning, not quite where we needed to be, but way better. And her split stance, split squats went from 10 pounds to 25 pounds in each hand. Again, much better. Same thing with her cable rows, 20 to 30, and one-arm presses, 15 to 20. Now we have a pretty appreciable baseline to work from, and what this allows us to think about is like, I'm not as concerned about her physical capacity being her limitation on the field, right? It's now like, all right, she has to just practice more and get better at her skills, right? And I know for a fact, this athlete said to me before going into the season, like, man, this is like the best I've felt ever going into like the start of a season. So this was about a 2.5 month approach. It doesn't take that much time to gain some of this stuff, as long as it's targeted correctly. All right. On the flip side, right, what will we do with this person? Okay, again, we've got all of our stuff up there, and movement, really good. So she gets a check, right? 300-yard shuttle, 55, 58, and then it was 56, 56. Done. Like, we're golden with that. Her vertical jump, high of 13. That's a little bit on the low side, right? It's still pretty good, but it's a little bit on the low side. Her plank test, check. Split squats, 40 pounds in each hand. She got up to 45s afterwards. Check. One-arm cable row, 40 and 35. She got up to 45 and 40. Check. Split stance one-arm cable press, 25, 25, up to 30s, right? So, and her med ball throws were excellent as well. So, like, there's not really much that stands out. As maybe, though, I kind of want to work on her power. So some of her stuff can be geared more towards this explosiveness component than anything else. And I don't have to hammer the other things as much. And again, she's in a great shape. This is another athlete that's like, awesome. We know that if we work a little bit more on her skill stuff, she's got the capacity underneath her to really be, to handle it and to actually improve. So when you have the right assessment and the roadmap, it actually makes it really easy then to program and figure out where to go next. All right, so training should complement your practices. You shouldn't feel beat up after lifts so much that you can't play. Training isn't punishment, right? And the goal is to incrementally get better each time. So ultimately, what we should see is I should have a very slow start, right? In that where typically people are like, all right, I got to train, I got to beat myself up to get this effect. In reality, we actually want to keep it slow and steady, which means if my normal hard program might be 4 sets of like 8. The first week is probably only going to be 2 sets of 8. The next week might be 2 sets of 10, and then the third week might be 3 sets of 8, and then the fourth week might be 3 sets of 10, and then that fifth week might be that 4 sets of 8 really hard. All right, we've just gradually increased our capacity to handle it and loaded it specific in time with also our training. So the idea isn't to turn this into like, you know, a game in itself in that there has to be a winner and a loser and I've got to go all out. It's more to actually use it to help promote the qualities I'm trying to develop so that when I go to practice, I still feel really good to play, but also I'm seeing this nice linear growth path. All right, so this comes from Derek Hansen, and he's probably one of the top sprint coaches right now in the country. In terms of giving information and developing. He works with a lot of NFL teams, NHL teams, MLB stuff. Most notably, I know he worked with the Kansas City Chiefs recently. So what his idea, and again, this is a little bit in the context more of sprinters, but we can take away some really good ideas from it, is that 35% of the time is going to be our high intensity stuff, high load, stuff like that, okay? 65% of the time is low. Right? So if we are finding ourselves, man, I'm just constantly putting the gas pedal down all the time, it's going to come at a cost and it doesn't actually yield the result we want, right? Whereas this guy is telling us that if we kind of keep this, more often than not, we do some low-level stuff the majority of the time, and then we make our highs really high a couple of times, we're going to get a really good benefit, okay? So what does high intensity really look like? We're talking 95% to 100%. So where we would use this in soccer is our sprints, all right, we have to figure out where that threshold is and kind of utilize that as much as possible. So like on our woodway, I love the woodways for this reason, is it gives us the miles per hour in the upper left-hand corner, and we can kind of get a gauge as to where maximal intensity is for that person. And then based off of that, we can say, all right, here's what I need to hit. We're going to do it maybe once or twice a week. We're going to take we'll see in a second, we're going to take a ton of rest in between so we can keep producing that output. And then the other days, we're going to keep it really easy and light. All right. Medium intensity is 76% to 94%. This is where most of your practices and games live. All right. What's hard is that if we stay in this zone, it'll feel like work. The only thing, though, is it doesn't yield that big of a return on investment over time. Because we're not pushing the upper echelon of the capacity, we typically get these very small jumps or no jump at all, right? So probably 76 to 85% in a lot of our running distances stuff probably isn't enough to cause an adaptation. It's probably maintaining what we have. And if we were in these lower ones, 75% and below, if we're not using it as a way to recover from something really high, it's probably actually going to bring us down. So what we need to be cognizant of is that in terms of our training intensities, we either want to be on that really high end of the spectrum, all right, and really pushing it and making sure we're doing quality work, or we want to be kind of on that low end of the spectrum and making sure we'll be able to recover from the other stuff. Because if we live in the middle, it's going to come at a severe cost. Usually joints will start to kind of wear out, tissues will become a little cranky, and we're just going to feel fatigued, okay? So how do you train for maximal speed and strength in field sports? Again, we want to stay out of that 76% to 94% range. We actually want to live in that range for our strength training, right? Because we're not powerlifters. We don't need to be in that 1 rep max area at all. And we don't need to be in this like endurance kind of stuff where it's lower, below 75%. We want to actually live in those 75 or 76 to 94% ranges where we can kind of get some of the tissues to respond to some external loads, which we know we don't get. All right. And we want to keep our training days just close to this high-low model so that we kind of are able to recover from what we're doing. All right, so what would a training day look like? So normally we might use 2 to 4 movement prep drills. So maybe that athlete with the peen and extension and a dysfunctional toe touch, they might be a really good candidate for some all fours breathings and hip cars to help get that complex back to moving and segmentally and getting it working, all right? And then we might do some dynamic movement, 3 to 5 drills. So some skipping, maybe working on running mechanics, maybe some dynamic mobility, all right? Things you would think of like your FIFA 11 drills are kind of in that dynamic sense. We would probably be a little bit more specific in terms of gearing more towards running mechanics and change of direction and stuff like that, and start getting athletes moving more in that as opposed to just kind of some of the active mobility stuff. And then we would do sprints, right? Sprints, 1 to 5 maximal, okay? We'll see in a slide in a minute, we do not have to be doing 10 sets of all-out sprints, full field sprints, right? There's probably no benefit to that at some point because our performance is going to drop significantly because we get too tired. You would need like maybe an hour to do those because you should be taking probably like a 2 to 3 minute break in between each one of them, okay? So these could also involve change of direction stuff, right? So one of the things that Derek Hansen said that I really liked is like, if I'm doing these agility kind of change of direction drills, at the end of it, just sprint for an extra 10 to 15 yards, right? So you kind of go move and then accelerate and keep accelerating. And that way you can still kind of train some of that quality of that full arm action and full acceleration, getting up into a full sprint mechanic position. All right, and then we would do our 3 to 5 strength exercises. All right, again, typically we would pick multi-joint stuff. I don't need a soccer player doing sets of dumbbell curls, right, before they do anything else. Like that's not going to really yield us anything. So we may think about split squats, bench press, one-arm cable rows, goblet squats, etc. And we may be living in the 6 to 12 rep range, 2 to 4 sets. Right? Again, it doesn't have to be super complicated, but we want to be using some intensity that will yield us some hypertrophy and maximal strength gains, all while giving us the ability to recover from it. So what does it look like in season? Right? What you can see is what we will have is on a practice day, like on a Sunday, I might have a moderate to low practice day, right? So I might work on my aerobic system a little bit, mobility, and I might be doing some tempo runs, and if I really want to, maybe like 1 or 2 sprints just to maybe get the system going, right? Let's say Monday is a game day. That's a high day for training, and if possible, maybe we do an upper body lift afterwards. Okay, it's already a high day in terms of training load. Why not add something on top of it that we don't have to worry about later in the week? And it's the upper body. We know it doesn't get taxed nearly enough as it does as the lower body in soccer. Right? The next day would be a low day to recover from our high day. Okay. Here's the thing: is if you didn't play, that's a great opportunity to lift or to go for a hard practice. So what you may have is kind of one group that's doing something a little bit easier and another group that's actually working much harder because they never actually saw the intensity on that high game if they didn't have an opportunity to get in the game. All right. So what we typically see sometimes is the players that don't play so much actually get very deconditioned throughout the season because they're missing some of those high days. All right. And they may do a total body lift that day as well as maybe a little bit more intensity, whereas the other group might just do their low aerobic work, right, and just kind of skills and practice and not go crazy. The next day would be moderate. We might go into our sprint, and we may go into, again, an upper body lift or a moderate total body lift or a lower lift. Again, maybe just 2 sets of 5 to 8 reps and just kind of get the feel for some weights. And then we have another game on Thursday, right? And that would probably be a full, nothing at the end of it, just play the game. All right, and then Friday, again, another low day. If you didn't play, that might be a high day for you in terms of lifting. And then Saturday would be kind of either off or you might have a moderate total body lift. Okay, so you can see where we can plug in some of these things and it will match up with our game schedule and our practice schedule so that it's, again, supplementing what we're trying to do, not taking place. All right? In some cases, though, like our athletes that maybe don't get in the games as much as we'd like, they'd actually need to be doing some of this stuff no matter what. All right? If we were to look at it in the off season, I mean, we've got a lot of stuff here. This is typically our system for what we're looking for to get athletes to hit a baseline of what we need them to kind of hit for us to feel comfortable with them being physically prepared, right? So for, again, Our shuttle runs, we want them under 60 seconds. Our woodway speeds, we want them above 15.5. Our mile run, we want them under 6 minutes and 30 seconds. Vertical jump, 14 inches. Chest pass, 14 inches. Supine curl up, 14 inches. Those are all our med ball throws. Split squat, minimum of 30 pounds in each hand for 8 reps each leg. Split row, minimum of 30 pounds in each arm for 8 reps each arm. Split one arm cable press, minimum of 20 pounds each arm for 8 reps each arm. Okay, and these are females. Males have a little bit higher weights. And what we can see is that like during our off season, which we will say, let's just say the summer, or actually let's say the summer, right? What we may be seeing in phase 5 is a 3 to 5 day lift, right? With 3 to 4 working sets where we're really working on strength, power, and max speed. Okay, whereas in season, so we're going September through November, right, which would be phase 2, we're looking at a 1 to 2 day lift, one working set, which means, you know, we may do 3 sets during that day, but really only one of them is going to be pushing some weight that is going to cause us to feel some intensity. All right, and it's just enough to give us an external stimulus, but not enough to feel beat up for when we have to play. All right, and during that phase 2 season, we're really working on our max speed and our aerobic recovery more than anything else. All right, we want those qualities to be top notch, and we want to be maintaining all the strength we gained in the off season. Okay, and then over here we just kind of put in some ideas of average numbers of passes and shots and long balls in order to get the feel for how many times you're actually hitting those during a game. Right. So on average, when we looked at a lot of data on professional players, we saw that they were hitting roughly around at the high end of like a midfielder, something like I thought it was like 300 passes in a game, and as like a defender, they may only hit like 10 to 15. Right? So we just kind of started to aggregate some of those numbers and give us a little bit idea of how do we accumulate enough volume so that we can tolerate sometimes going into that game situation and not feel blown up. Because if I spent all summer just doing long balls and then all of a sudden in the game I had to make 30 short passes, A, I might not be proficient at it, but B, I may have developed a different strategy to hitting these long passes, and I'm not ready for that kind of quick action stuff. Right? So if you have any questions on this stuff, please feel free to reach out, and we can always help develop a program for you or develop some kind of system that will encompass this stuff and get you on pace to where you want to go.